Let's go to the preface for just a moment, Roman numeral 11. Second paragraph. Because this book has become the basic text for our society and has helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery, there exists a sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. Therefore, the first portion of this volume describing the AA recovery program has been left untouched in the course of revisions made for both the second and third editions. Two little ideas. First, basic text for our society. And I think when we see those words, we're alerted to the fact that we do have a textbook in front of us. And I think we all remember textbooks and what they are. Some of us don't remember them too fondly, but we do remember them. A textbook is a book that is used basically to transfer information from the mind of one human being through the written word to the mind of another human being. And as we make that transfer, the knowledge of the user of the book is going to increase. A textbook will nearly always assume that the reader of the book is going to know very little about the subject matter. Almost always starts at a simple level, and then as the knowledge of the user of the book increases, the information becomes more difficult. For instance, let's say my friend Joe here knows nothing at all about mathematics. Joe can't add, he can't subtract, he can count. He can count to 21 if he's standing there naked and got everything where it's supposed to be. And I walk up to Joe and I say, Joe, I've got a textbook on mathematics, and in chapter 5 there's problems dealing with algebra. I'd like for you to go to chapter 5 and work them. Well, now Joe opens it up and looks at chapter 5, and he can't even add and subtract, much less deal with algebra. Looks like just so many hen scratches to him. But if I'd say, Joe, in this textbook on mathematics, chapter 1 deals with addition and subtraction. And if you read it and study it and ask questions when you need to, you'll learn how to add and subtract. And sure enough, he does that. And then I say, based on your knowledge of addition and subtraction, you can now go to chapter 2 and learn how to multiply and divide. And he does that. And then we take him to chapter 3 where he learns fractions and decimals. And slowly we lead him through the book and prepare his mind for the algebra problems in chapter 5. We think one of the greatest mistakes being made in the world today is new people who come on not only to our fellowship but many other fellowships. We hand them the big book, we say go to chapter 5 and do what it says. And they go to chapter 5 and they run into a bunch of algebra problems. Step 1 said we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. And the new alcoholic says, I'm not powerless over anything. They have no idea what we're talking about when we make that statement. Step 2 says we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. He said, man, don't tell me I'm crazy. Yeah, I do stupid things when I'm drinking, but when I'm sober, I'm like other people. Has no idea what we mean by insanity. Now, if you're not powerless in step 1 and you're not nuts in step 2, then you sure don't need to turn your life and will over to something you don't even understand in step 3. You know, if there's any one thing that we can get through this weekend, I hope will be the importance of the doctor's opinion in the first 4 chapters. Giving us information, teaching us in our mind what alcoholism is and what it isn't, what we mean by powerlessness and power, preparing our mind, getting it ready for the program which begins with chapter 5. But the doctor's opinion in the first 4 chapters certainly have that other information. I think the other thing that's so important here is because it's helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery, there exists a sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. Therefore, the first portion of this volume, the first 164 pages, the recovery section, has been left untouched since 1939. Now, in 1955, they felt it was necessary to change some stories in the back of the book, to take some out, add some more in to more accurately reflect the changing membership of AA. And they came out with the second edition. In 1976, they felt they needed to make the same changes and came out with the third edition. But the recovery section has remained the same, whether it's in the first edition, second edition, or third edition. This might be the second miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous, is how we people who already know everything there is to know and who love to impose our will upon other people and who love to change things to suit us, not other people to suit us. It amazes me how we've managed to leave this thing alone for 50 years this year. Thank God we have, and I hope we'll be able to in the future. It is exactly the same program today that it was in 1939, the same program in 1989. Let's go for just a moment to the forward to the first edition. First paragraph there, again, a couple little ideas, and then we'll get into the doctor's opinion. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. And we like to look at two ideas here. First, we're more than 100 men and women. There was 40 of them made the decision to write the book in 1937. And they told Bill, they said, Bill, we want you to write the book. After all, you've been sober longer than anybody else, at that time just a little over 3 years. And they said, you know more about it than anybody else, and we want you to write it, but it's not to be your book. It will be our book. And they said, as you write these chapters, we want to see them. And we will add to, delete from, and change around. And when we're through with this, it'll be the collective knowledge, experience, and wisdom of all 40 of us, showing other people exactly what we had to know and what we had to do in order to recover. Now, we know by 1939 that number had risen to 100. Now, usually when I read a book, it is authored by one person. And with my keen intellectual alcoholic mind, when I read a book authored by one person, if I disagree with them, I usually say, well, who in the hell are they to think they're smarter than I am? And I just ignore them. But if I do that with a big book, I'm going to be arguing not with one, but with 100 people. And also I'm going to be arguing with 100 people who have recovered from the same thing that's killing me, a hopeless condition of the mind and of the body as a practicing alcoholic. That makes it a little bit harder to argue with these people when I realize that. The other idea is to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. Joe and I have been in AA long enough to know and fully understand that there's only one requirement for membership in AA. Now, you can't make anybody do anything in AA they don't want to do. You can come to an AA meeting and you say, I don't like you people at all. Sure don't like your lousy 12 steps. And you can just barely stand that coffee, the stuff you're calling coffee over there. And nobody can say a word about that. You know, you don't even have to be sober to be a member of AA. It helps if you are, but you really don't have to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. But this book doesn't deal with membership in the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. This book deals with one thing and one thing only, recovery from the disease of alcoholism. And the main purpose of this book is to show other alcoholics precisely how the first 100 recovered. Not generally, or not in some odd way, but precisely how they recovered from their disease. It's kind of like making cake. If you make a strawberry cake, which is my favorite cake, I just love it, and I bite into it, and the texture is just right, the taste is right, the moisture content's right, and it just melts in my mouth, and I'll probably say, who made this cake? Well, if you're a good cook, you'll probably say, well, I did. And I'll say, would you tell me how? And you say, sure. And you'll sit down and you'll write out for me a set of directions on how to make that cake. Now, I take those directions home in my kitchen, and I find that you've told me the ingredients to put in it, the quality of the ingredients, the quantity of the ingredients, the sequence in which to mix them together, the temperature at which to bake it, and how long to bake it. And if I follow your directions exactly, precisely, when that thing comes out of the oven, cools off, and I bite into it, I believe I could expect it to taste exactly like your cake tasted. But if I get your directions in my kitchen, and my keen intellectual alcoholic mind starts working, and it begins to say, you know, it looks to me like 5 eggs would be better than 3. Or instead of a cup of sugar, I'll put 2.5. Or instead of baking it for 18 minutes, I'll bake it at 30. Instead of 375, I'll bake it at 450. Now, when that thing comes out of the oven, cools off, and I bite into it, well, sure, I'm going to be biting into a piece of cake. But I wonder how closely it would resemble your cake, which was my reason for making it in the first place. There is a precise, specific, clear-cut method of recovery from the disease of alcoholism in the big book Alcoholics Anonymous. And those of us that wish to recover as the first 100 did, if we follow that set of directions, I think we can expect the same thing they got. Recovery from a hopeless condition of the mind and of the body.